Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Super M work continues. So on the bench today I have the PTO drive, and if you remember from when I took this out of the machine, I mentioned the engagement lever has never really been right on this thing. Somebody had tried to kind of tack weld it back on because it had broken off at one point. It was barely on there. First time we tried to engage it after getting the tractor, it just fell off, and we rarely ever use the PTO, so we never bothered to try and stick it back on. So we did find the broken lever, and we don't have much of a nub left there, but we'll do a quick rundown on the disassembly. I've already been into this, as you can see. Pretty simple, not a whole lot to it. So we have this big mega seal that's in the end cap bearing retainer here. There's kind of a dust ring and two leather lips on it. So to take one of these apart, normally that seal would stay in here, but you know, I've already had it off and popped it out, so we'll just get it out of the way. But to take this apart, the two bolts come out, bearing cap gets pulled out normally with that seal still inside. At this point, I'll knock the PTO shaft out of the housing. Now is when we'll check the condition of the bearing. This one is just fine. If I had to take the bearing off, we have the cinch nut for the bearing, we have a lock nut and a fold over lock between to secure. So you'd straighten the lock tab, take this outer nut off, lock would come off, unthread the inner nut, and then the bearing could come off. Like I say, we don't have to mess with that. This one's just fine. At this point now, this engagement sleeve just comes off of the lever. That can get out of the way. At this point now, all we've got left is the internal engagement lever, the detent poppet, and what's left of the external lever. So I'll begin by removing this plug. It has a straight screwdriver slot in the end, and we can peel out the detent spring. Working from the inside now, this bolt comes out. And as I pull the external lever out, the internal one will fall off of it. Make sure that puck is in good condition, which it is. We can then stick a screwdriver in from this side, push that poppet out, and finish removing the external lever. There's our detent poppet for that internal lever. Now at this point, all that's left in the housing is the old oil seal, but I'm not going to worry about pulling that out because we've got a broken ear on this casting. It's been that way ever since we got the tractor. It's for one of the three mounting areas for the PTO shield, and that's been gone ever since we've had it. So that means another shopping trip was in order. So after a trip to the local tractor salvage yard, I came home with this PTO housing here. Three good ears on it for the PTO shield. It didn't, we'll put it this way, it was cheap enough that it didn't pay to try and weld a new ear onto this broken one. Plus, this new housing also came with the lever still intact to replace that broken one that we had in the Super M, the little washer that goes beneath it, which obviously fell off and disappeared when that tang broke off, and it still had the vertical engagement rod with the L bracket that locates the rod at the top cover. So we're pretty well set right there. Now as far as the seal, like this one I didn't pull out here, for this engagement lever where it goes down into the bottom of the casting right there, IH part number was a 70268D. It crossed to like a CR or SKF 6309. There's the specs I needed. 625 shaft and 1.25 inch bore. So I was not able to find that 6309 online. I found a couple other numbers that were the same dimension. Also couldn't find any of those online. Went to my local parts store, gave them my specs, and they said they could come up with something. Well, they give me this. Number really isn't important because, well, I'll just show you guys here. Shaft size is correct, but otherwise way too small. So this is for 1 1/8 inch bore, and I need 1 1/4 inch. So I'm really not going to fault them. Those guys do a great job for me 95% of the time, probably 99% of the time. They come through, and some of the goofy oddball applications I've brought them, I'm surprised they haven't run me out of the store, to be honest. So they don't owe me anything, and in the time it would take me to go back to the store, try to return that, try to find something else, wait a few days for that, well, in less than the time that I could go to the store and back, I can just sleeve that down and go with the seal that they got me. So that actually went pretty well. That's not an ideal setup by any means, but this is a pretty non-critical seal right here. The shaft that goes in it does probably like a 10-degree rotation every now and again, so it's not like we have a continually spinning shaft. There's no fluid pressure behind it. I backed up the sleeve with a little bit of sealer, as well as a little bit of sealer around the OD of the seal. Still, it all drove in well, so I don't expect to have any problems there at all. As long as we're on the topic of seals, let's talk about the PTO output shaft seal. The new ones are in there already. This was that big triple-lipped monstrosity that was in there. IH number for that was a 45702D. Crosses to the CR or SKF 13671 with an asterisk in my interchange manual to use 2 of these seals in place of that one very large one. So those were the new seals right there. I have them installed back to back, packed them with grease between, so the outer one will be more of a dust seal. The inner one will retain all of the fluid. And I made the gaskets for the PTO, so that's enough with the housekeeping. Let's just let's get this put together. All right, start with the external engagement lever. And before that goes all the way in, make sure to start the internal engagement lever onto it. There we are. Lock it in place with the bolt. Now I'll line the engagement tube with the internal lever and start the PTO shaft in from the opposite side. There, finished seating the bearing home. Bearing retainer with the new seals comes next. Now we'll finish up with the detent poppet. And the spring. And finally the plug. Alright, quick function check. Now, the way this works, this end of the PTO shaft is supported by the back of the counter shaft in the transmission. And you have this long tube that is connected to the engagement lever. It has this heavy collar welded on at the end. This collar is splined to the PTO shaft back in here, but then there are also these open splines at the front. So, when you go to engage the PTO, you would pull up on the lever back here. That shoots this whole tube forward and engages these splines with the back of the counter shaft, and that's what drives the PTO shaft clear out the back of the housing back here. So then to release it, engagement lever gets pushed down. This basically slides this tube and collar back, disengages it from the splines on the counter shaft, so it's just like basically like a pilot bearing on an input shaft for a transmission. This is just spinning back there and not being driven anymore. So that's the way this works. Good detent action, engaged and disengaged. So that's working just as it should. That means that the PTO assembly is complete. So on to the next project.
Well, next up on the Super M project here is I've got the governor tore down, cleaned up, checked over, and starting to get ready for reassembly. Everything from what I could see, the thing worked good before I took it down, and I can't really find any major issues for parts replacement, so I am going to be putting this back together with the original parts. It worked good before, see no reason it shouldn't work good now. So get started putting this thing together. First piece going in is I'm going to get this onto the rock shaft lever. The reason for that is a whole lot easier to get the pin and cotter pin installed. Well, next up we'll get the seal in for the speed change lever shaft, they call it. And I did get a little grease on the lips of that seal already, and pretty straightforward. I just generally find a socket that fits them pretty good, square it up into the bore, and just tap it in. Check once in a while to make sure it's going square. Okay, looks good. Now next we're going to get the governor weights and carrier assembly in. I went through and oiled everything, necessarily needed oil. Everything's smooth, bearings are smooth, and a little assembly lube on the end on the rear bushing. So let's get that in. Bearings lined up, bushing in, and looking good. Next up, the speed control lever and shaft. We'll get that in the assembly. Next up is the governor spring lever. Got the key in the shaft already. Got the governor spring in. Make sure everything is lined up with the keyway. Got your high and low stops. So let's get this put on. Get it fished on the spring. They're lined up with the key. And it'll tap her on. Okay, all that's left, tighten up the cinch bolt. Next up, get the governor rod housing on. Goes on just like that. With the gasket, we'll just be putting a real light coating of sealer on that and get her bolted up. Okay, I do put a light coating on both sides of all my gaskets. If I only do it on one side, I will mention that in a video. So, like I say, it doesn't take much. Just, I don't even really need squeeze out on this piece. Okay, we'll get that tightened down. Next up, we'll get the throttle shaft assembly in. That goes up into this section at the top up here. It sticks out here. And this is what connects the governor to the carburetor. I do have the gasket felt seal retainer, felt seal, and the plate that holds the felt seal into the retainer. I will be oiling this before I put it together. Again, light coat of sealer, both sides of gasket, and this one here just held on with 2 screws. So I'll get that in position. And next up, we have to get the pin in that hooks the shaft to the governor. And we got the throttle shaft hooked up, cotter pin in the back, folded over. Next up, I'm just going to give everything here, all my swivel points, a coat of oil, make sure lubricated before I put this together. Everything seems to be working nice and smooth and the way it's supposed to. Okay, the last thing I need to do with this is get the governor housing cover on. I'm just going to put this gasket on dry for now. It's very possible I might have to get in and readjust the high and low stops on the governor here, so that way I can take it off. I shouldn't ruin my gasket. I need to get some paint on this anyway, so it's a good way to cover this up besides. So we get the cover on. Now one more step, getting this tractor put back together. Got the governor rebuilt now. You'll notice I have 3 different bolts in here. What that is, I have a Charlene power steering unit that goes on this, and this is where the power steering pump bracket mounts. There's different bolts for that, they're longer. I just wanted to get something temporary in there just to hold the cover down. What we're going to be doing is painting this unit off from the tractor so we can get paint all the way around, all sides on this, and on the engine block, as this mounts real close to the engine block. So this will be painted off the tractor. But otherwise, everything turned out real good. Real satisfied the way it went together. And we'll get this prepped a little bit for paint and get on to something else. Thanks for watching.